Welcome to WeAreSC. This is Erik McKinney along with Scott Schrader, and we've got early signing day for the 2022 class coming up on Wednesday. And Scott, I don't know about you, this is the first kind of USC signing day. It feels like in a long time. I'm sure it's not actually in a long time. It feels like forever, where you're going into signing day with kind of, some butterflies a little bit in how this could go for USC, in that you could hear that name a lot for some big time players on Wednesday. Again, feels like it's been a while.
Well, I mean, it's at least been a while until you've gone through the process like we're used to, where kids are visiting late in the recruiting process on campus. You get that buzz going. So it does feel. I hadn't even thought of that, but it does feel. Even though we did have signing day a year ago, it was nothing like this, and even. It was the second signing day where most of the action happened for USC anyway. But yeah, USC, it is setting up right now for USC to potentially have all things considered. And maybe I don't even have to add that part, the all things considered part, but it could be a really, really, really fun day for USC fans.
And I think part of it is that, right? You do look at the 2021 class and there were a bunch of guys. The lull of this year, like the toll that the season took on just kind of covering the team and day in and day out and dealing with kind of everything that comes along with a 4-8 season. I guess before we go in, we're going to go kind of position by position, but your sense when Lincoln Riley gets hired, what did that do to recruiting just in the absolute immediacy? Because it was something where he needed to come in and right away kind of light this thing up a little bit and put together a big push to signing day.
Yeah, I think we saw the immediate impact, from Austin Powers. Allow myself to introduce myself, but I think we saw the immediate impact immediately when Lincoln Riley visited Rayleigh Brown. The day of his announcement. But when we went to the announcement to Coliseum, I think right after that he went to Rayleigh's house, and a commitment came from him. I think the in-home visit with Cyrus Moss, that leading to an in-home visit, because USC had no shot at all with Cyrus Moss. So there were other guys that came and visited late. I don't know if you look at the impact of Lincoln Riley's hiring from a USC perspective on getting a Marvin Jones to come out and visit USC. I think that's a Lincoln Riley and actually more of a Jamar Cain deal. I'm told that this is something that USC fans should be on the lookout for with Coach Cain, because I'm told he is just like a Dante Williams, and he's going to be a guy that's going to go out and get USC some big time elite guys. So I think we saw the impact immediately. Interest, guys that were on the fence, surprisingly on the fence, like Zion Branch. I think that the hiring of Lincoln Riley is going to put guys over the top that were wavering on where they stood with USC.
And this is a guy, Lincoln Riley, coming out, especially to Southern California, the schools that you're all over. His name gets brought up a lot. And you're talking about guys coming with him in Cain and in Dennis Simmons and in guys like that, where USC has just loaded up with recruiters, with position coach recruiters. We saw it with the last staff come in a little bit. You had Craig Nivar in there and Vic Soto, and they were doing a better job at bringing in position coaches who could recruit. I mean, at this point, it looks like everybody who lines up out there right now is going to be an A+ recruiter on this staff that Riley's put together, led by Lincoln Riley, who is, if not the best recruiting head coach, one of the guys that I'm sure you constantly hear about from kids.
Yeah, when I go around and I'm talking whether it's kids in Southern California, it probably is more so other parts of the country where Oklahoma's hitting the recruiting trail a little bit harder than they do out here. Although they were hitting it pretty hard out here, and USC was feeling that. But it was just the guys that are recruiting. I mean, you're talking about like the running backs coach from Georgia Tech, Choice. You were the one that kind of enlightened me to how good he was at recruiting. But you bring these coaches in, and Lincoln Riley was one of those coaches that, if I asked a kid who was recruiting them from Oklahoma, it was always Lincoln Riley was at least 1A or 1B. So like Mario Cristobal, his impact with these kids, he's able to develop a relationship with these kids that not every head football coach is. Maybe not, some coaches aren't able to, and most coaches aren't willing to. Most coaches aren't willing to go. The coaches that are winning are, but most coaches aren't willing to go out and do what Lincoln Riley does and Mario Cristobal does. And I think, to a certain extent, I always was impressed with Dan Mullen. I know I hear a lot of stuff about how awful he was at recruiting, but every time I talk to kids, I would hear feedback that he was somebody that would contact them 2-3 times a week. And, when coaches are doing that, that was not happening at USC with Clay Helton. So yeah, Lincoln Riley is going to be the best recruiter on the USC coaching staff.
So let's look at Wednesday now, sign day, and it's going to be interesting. It's signing day is what it's called. It's the signing period, and you've got a few days. We won't hear from Lincoln Riley wrapping up the class until Friday, and so it won't be from him on Wednesday. USC kind of also in an interesting position. There's going to be kids that wait to announce, potentially some kids that wait to announce at All-Star games. You still have the February signing period. USC probably heavy in the transfer portal, so we're not going to get a sense on Wednesday exactly of what the entire addition to the USC 2022 roster is, but we're going to go kind of position by position. I'll tee you up here as we go through it to maybe what we can either look for on Wednesday or just kind of throughout this period as USC kind of goes through the recruiting process here. And we'll start at quarterback, and kind of an interesting thing there where they had a commitment from Devin Brown for a while, the quarterback from Arizona. Went out to Utah, followed in Jackson Dart's footsteps at Corner Canyon out there, had a big season. What have you seen kind of at quarterback from USC in this class?
Well, right now, they have a really good quarterback at USC and have a really good backup quarterback in Miller Moss now with Keaton Slovis entering the transfer portal. But at quarterback right now, I think that just what I'm hearing, I don't think Devin Brown is going to be somebody that USC has a shot at getting any longer because of his relationship that he had. I think with Seth Dagey and Graham Harrell as well. And I think there was probably something going, for all of the grief that Clay Helton is given, he did have some close relationship with some guys and, was a positive influence on the recruiting perspective. But quarterback, I'm just like, one of the crazy things I'm hearing, and it may not end up being that crazy, is Caleb Williams from Oklahoma. There's a lot of talk back there from the guys that I know that cover Oklahoma that it's like legit talk that he could possibly enter the transfer portal. And, ending up at USC, I guess we're guessing that's where he would end up if he did end up in the transfer portal. But, he could end up at another school. But if you look at the quarterbacks that Lincoln Riley has produced while he's been at Oklahoma, whether it was even as an assistant or as a head football coach, it's hard to beat that track record. But other than that, as far as quarterbacks, I have not heard anything. We know they have the class of 2023 set with Malachi Nelson. So and that was somebody I forgot to bring up as far as the immediate impact part, Malachi and Makai Lemon. So I'll go ahead and mention that here. But quarterback, not hearing much more about that. But, I think like you talked about, we're going to start hearing more after this signing day and then for the next 6 weeks going forward.
And that's going to be you got Jackson Dart in the 2021 class, Malachi Nelson in the 23 class. Yeah. Fitting someone in between there is always kind of a challenge when you're recruiting that. But, like we said, Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma kind of able to bring in quarterback after quarterback after quarterback. So he's not a guy who seems afraid to load up at that position and try to sort things out. So I like you're saying, one of those positions to watch going forward there. We'll go to running back, and it's such a small class right now for USC. It's not going to be a surprise when you don't have any guys, but they've got Rayleigh Brown, who we're going to kind of throw in as a running back, a slot receiver, kind of just throw him out as one of your 11 on offense and figure out sort of what to do with him. You mentioned him as kind of one of the big guys that jumped in early when Lincoln Riley's out there, but a couple other targets kind of for USC to go after here on Wednesday and then potentially after that.
Well, as far as running back goes, we're one of the guys, for right now, it might be the only guy other than Rayleigh Brown, who obviously could play running back. Javonte Barnes from Desert Pines High School in Las Vegas. This was a kid who was interested in USC. I thought a year and a half ago, I thought he was going to end up at USC. So the interest in USC is strong with him. He's originally from Florida, so there was always an idea or thought in his head like that might be an option for him to go back that direction. But here again, you had Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, but also with DeMarco Murray, who is from Las Vegas himself. And it's turning out that the DeMarco Murray is one hell of a recruiter. So, USC is after Javonte hard. They got him in for an official visit this past weekend. He had a great time. USC was feeling good about him. But I was told today Oklahoma's feeling good about him too. And that right now, Javonte Barnes is truly undecided.
That's going to be a fascinating one. I think, again, like you said, you go back for a while ago, looked like USC, but there was a time where you had three kind of elite running backs in the West region, and that's Gavin Sawchuk out in Colorado, and Ray Leak and Javonte, and it looked like Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma was going to end up with all three of those guys, which would be unbelievable for that.
Yeah.
So goes back to what we mentioned earlier. Lincoln Riley can recruit on the offensive side of the ball. He can do some recruiting there. The one guy that I want to mention, you mentioned Tashard Choice coming over from Georgia Tech. There's a big time running back out of Georgia Tech, Jameer Gibbs, who Choice signed as one of the top 100 players in the country in his class, and a lot of schools wanted him. He's in the transfer portal. If there's a chance that Choice can bring him, that's another guy that maybe gets added to the backfield. And he is a talent. He is an absolute talent. It's going to be interesting to see. I know this staff, and Lincoln Riley especially, thinks that they can really build an incredible roster here, and a better roster at USC than he could have built at Oklahoma. It's one thing for an adult sort of with a family and having a job to come out to LA and make that move, pick up from the South and come on over here. It will be interesting to see if they can convince guys like Jameer Gibbs, like those guys from down there in the South to do that when it means leaving, Georgia and Alabama and coming over Texas and coming over Oklahoma. There's some schools. I mean, we've seen USC coaches do it, and absolutely when this thing's rolling, you can do it. So there will be, I think, some interesting battles kind of early on to see if this staff can kind of, I guess, plant their flag and make this kind of a destination spot. For me, Gibbs is maybe one of those guys. And I think if you saw what Keontae Ingram did in his, coming over and making a quick impact, that's a spot where you can pick it up and get going pretty quickly.
I mean, absolutely. And again, when you're talking about the offense that Lincoln Riley runs, it's sometimes you talk about these offenses that are attractive for quarterbacks, some are attractive for running backs, this receivers. Lincoln Riley's offense is legitimately a big time offense for all position players. So it will be interesting. And again, I think it's going to come down to the relationship part. And, and Choice obviously had that relationship with Gibbs and not Javonte Barnes and some other guys that actually were recruited by USC, like Brandon Campbell. He didn't end up at Georgia Tech, because going to USC was something that was going to happen from start to finish with him, with Mike Jinks being at USC. But he did say that Choice is one heck of a recruiter. So that goes back to you talking about this staff that's full of those guys.
And then let's go to wide receiver. It's interesting. Boy, there have been some wide receivers in and out of this class kind of throughout the duration of it. But at this point, and we're recording this Monday evening, so the news kind of for us just breaking is CJ Williams backing away from his Notre Dame pledge. That's been a guy that for USC has been in play, I think, for a little while.
Yeah, CJ Williams was one of those guys that, I think he wanted to stay home and either go to USC or UCLA, but neither program was going to suit him as far as the perspective of getting adequate discipline and accountability with the players, his teammates. And, I think we all were seeing that USC was a program that did not offer any strength as far as a foundation was concerned. And, the stories that we were hearing about USC sometimes made your head shake on what guys were getting away with. So that was why CJ Williams was looking at other programs. He was looking at Texas. He was looking at Ohio State. He was looking at Alabama, and he settled on Notre Dame, because I think Notre Dame kind of suited him from, it was all business at Notre Dame. But in the end, Notre Dame was a little bit too far away from home. USC hired Lincoln Riley, and I think immediately, as soon as USC announced that hiring from Lincoln Riley, I started getting text messages that CJ was ready to decommit already like 2 weeks ago. So his commitment tonight does not, he's not committed, but his decommitment tonight does not surprise us at all. And I think that, on signing day or whatever day he's going to announce. See, I wasn't even aware that they were going to be guys that were going to be announcing Wednesday all the way to Friday this year. And, in hearing that, because did I hear correctly? Damani might be announcing on Friday. Yeah. So this could be an interesting end of the week, not just signing day. So CJ, and I just want to add this about CJ. Take away football, and CJ Williams is one of those guys that you just can't help but root for. It's just, this kid is serious about school. He's serious about family. He's serious about his spirituality, and he's serious about, being a great teammate. And, if you start adding guys like that to USC, not just talented guys, but guys that have that type of mindset, things get turned around really, really quick.
Wide receiver is an interesting spot, and I'm going to lump it in with kind of tight end too, because Lincoln Riley has always used, and I mean since he got to Oklahoma, he did not use the tight end spot or the H-back spot before he got to Oklahoma. When he got there, Bob Stoops says, "Hey, we got these guys, and we can get these guys. You need to figure out how to use tight ends, how to use H-backs, kind of these hybrid, tight end fullbacks." And yes, USC fans might see kind of fullback-ish players again in this offense going forward. That seems to be a spot where maybe he can go to the portal and look at maybe some more advanced players who could get on the field early, because it doesn't feel like you're going to sign a high school kid who can go out and play that kind of physical position for that. But for me, I haven't seen, specific names or anything like that to pop up, but feels like a position where down the road before spring ball, maybe there's some more additions there.
There's going to be a lot going on. We're kind of uber focused on signing day, but I mean, there is a far bigger picture that we're going to be looking at between now and spring ball, like you talked about. And I think that's what's going to be extra exciting for USC fans, is because not only do they have a football coach that they're excited about, you're going to start seeing players. I think USC is going to be, this is like a no-brainer, but it's going to be, if not one of the most attractive spots in the country for transfers.
Let's go up front, kind of where it matters, offensive line. And it's one of those things, it kind of became habit to just sort of knock the USC offensive line. Oh, they need linemen. They got to get better. They did get better this last year. Yeah. I think everyone kind of has to be pleased with the way it goes. Joe Moore Award goes out to the best offensive line unit in the country. USC was not one of those. We're not talking about a top 5 unit or anything like that, but well, you have to be impressed with the steps forward they took, and you've got to give some credit to Clay McGuire, who's now up at Washington State. That's going to be a position that's fascinating and kind of some interesting names so far for USC along the offensive line. Again, they tried to go into Texas for quite a bit, and it feels like Sark is kind of just reaping the rewards of all this movement and coaching changes and just kind of landing everybody down there. But how do you see kind of offensive line shaking out on Wednesday through this early signing period, and then we can kind of hit sort of down the road as well?
Sure. Well, I think signing day, Keith Olson obviously decommitted a few days ago. That was the one offensive line commit that USC had. They were going after several that they had a great shot at. There's still one that won't sign. We'll talk about him after that. Won't sign on this signing day. We'll sign in February. But I mean, really, quite honestly, it seems like the one offensive lineman that USC has a shot in bringing in is a transfer from Virginia, Bobby Haskins. But, after that, I really don't know what to say. There was a shot at Devon Campbell. There was a shot at Neto Umeozulu. And, these are two guys you and I were talking about before we started recording this. Those two guys from Texas were actually probably going to be committed to USC by now. If Clay Helton was the head football coach and they had Clay McGuire as the offensive line coach. Now, obviously, it's not worth keeping a coach to get a couple of offensive linemen, but I'm just trying to give some perspective on how serious their interest was in USC. Now, what USC is fighting right now is, you have a great head coach, offensive coordinator, but now USC doesn't have an offensive line coach. Plus, the guy that developed the relationships with those guys from Texas was Vianney. So nobody knows what Vianney's future is too. And Vianney has to be honest with these kids, saying, I don't know if I'm coming back. So that's kind of why USC's in a position right now to where they're probably very likely not going to get, Umeozulu or Campbell. But, we can talk about Joshua Connolly here, and you can lead up to that here again. But, there are some guys that will probably come into play towards February and in the transfer portal as well.
Yeah, Bobby Haskins is one of those guys from Virginia, experience kind of at both tackles and a multi-year starter. Feels probably good at this point. Again, not in the 2022 class or necessarily a signing day thing, but potentially for USC to add him. Penn State commit Andre Roy came out for an official visit. So USC still able to get interest from linemen and bring them out and recruit without a confirmed offensive line coach. Let's go Josh Conerly for a little bit. Also Ernest Green. He was kind of the name locally. He's the one offensive lineman that USC has to get. Can you take us through a little bit kind of how that progressed? Again, big time standout from St. John Bosco, a school that USC, needs to do well at when they have big time guys there.
Yeah, again, we're talking about a guy who was, really high on USC. It was a local school. Ernest is so close with his family. So the thinking was that he was going to stay close to home, whether it was wherever up and down the West Coast, close to home, right? I mean, you get to Washington, that's 3 hours away. You might as well look at Texas and schools like that. But, USC was just, if you play for St. John Bosco and you are an elite offensive lineman or some defensive lineman, linebackers, chances are you're not going to end up at USC playing for Clay Helton. There was the lack of trust in their development skills at USC. And let's be honest, Clay Mcguire did a great job. And the whole development of offensive linemen at USC, I mean, we're talking about how overrated could that potentially be? I mean, if you're good, you're going to go to the NFL, chances are. And the USC's had Austin Jackson and they've had Elijah Vera Tucker. So it's not like USC can't, develop offensive linemen. So I always find that argument to be garbage. But that doesn't change the fact that Ernest just ultimately did not trust where USC was going as a football program. So, now they hire Lincoln Riley but they don't have an offensive line coach. So we're looking at that same situation. They were trying to get Ernest on campus this past weekend for a visit, even if it was just for one day, just to let him get the vibe and the sense that things are really, really different at USC. But they couldn't convince him to come. So, I'm sure he's going to be signing on Wednesday. That was the original plan. But, it would be interesting to see if that changes with some of these kids that had planned on signing on Wednesday and they don't. And so the thinking was all the way up until last week is that there was always a chance with Ernest because of how close USC was to home.
And Josh Connolly is a guy who's going to wait and take a little bit of time. So USC maybe does have an offensive line coach and can take a run at him.
Yeah. And Connolly is, again, we're talking about the relationships that he has with some of the people at USC. I think that it's a little bit different with Joshua Connolly in that I think Los Angeles, where the Connollys have a lot of family, I think what USC offers after football, which was also a factor with Devon Campbell and Neto as well, but what USC offers after football was ultra important to him. But he had such a close relationship with Vianney, Lenny Vandermeide, and Clay Mcguire. But there were also Gavin and Mondo, Armand Hawkins Jr. were also very, very vital in the recruitment of Joshua Connolly, along with Marshall Sherrington. Am I saying, I don't even know if I'm saying his name right. If it's Marshall Carrington. Oh, yeah.
Marshall Sherrington.
All right. So I was kind of saying it right. Anyway, getting names right is always a big deal. So, we were about ready to pronounce Barquette's name Barquet because it was Louisiana upbringing. But yeah, Connolly's a guy that he visited USC probably like 6 times. So and it was all on his own dime. He still has not taken his official visit. So that visit's going to happen in January. And I think that the fact that he really, really liked the Oklahoma program and Lincoln Riley previous to now will ultimately help USC with Joshua Connolly. But as of right now, I would say it's going to be Michigan versus USC.
You mentioned Earl Barquette. Let's go to the defensive line. And again, like I mentioned, we're going here Monday night. So again, recent news for us is the
Yeah.
commitment. TCU defensive lineman who was in the transfer portal took an official visit to USC over the weekend, and that's Earl Barquette. This is the second year now USC's kind of gone into the transfer portal to look for a still sort of young-ish, but with some experience defensive lineman. Clearly a spot where they want to add bodies and get some production out of pretty quickly.
Yeah, and really, if you're thinking about where USC is at with recruiting those kind of guys, he's pretty much going to be it right now. So, it's been slim pickings in Southern California for quite a while with those kind of guys, those big, heavy, big body defensive tackles. Because USC right now has got guys that are playing defensive tackle that do not fit that category. They're basically just enlarged linebackers. So, if I think ideally USC is going to want to go out and they're going to want to bring in some elite high school football players at those positions ultimately. But I think between now and spring ball, like you talked about again, this is a position where the transfer portal is going to be vital for USC.
But the edge up front is a little bit different. They are maybe in it for some elite guys out there, and you're talking, that's kind of the code now, calling them edge defenders, because there's so much of that sort of 3-4 hybrid where they're a defensive end, they're an outside linebacker, and USC's got a few of those guys on the radar, including number one overall prospect, Marvin Jones Jr., who came out on an official visit from Florida. You mentioned him as kind of one of those names where when Lincoln Riley comes in, all of a sudden USC can be in it for some of those guys.
Yeah. Well, we'll start off when we talk about the edge. We'll talk about who's committed in Devin Tompkins from Stockton, California. There were a lot of questions on whether or not he was going to ultimately end up a part of this class. When guys started decommitting, it seemed like hourly. So I think that he's a 6'6", 220 pounds, 6'5", 220 pound kid with a huge frame, very athletic. So I actually think that that's a very big pickup for USC. No matter who was coaching and what his ranking in is kind of irrelevant. But yeah, Marvin Jones is one of those guys to where, if you're talking to people that I know that, there are a lot of people that I know that don't follow recruiting that closely. They follow it closely enough to know who guys are, but they're not on our website. They have no interest in spending all day on message boards. But we're happy most of you are. But Jones is one of those guys where you would think that, come on, they're not getting Marvin Jones. But I mean, the reality is that they actually could get him. And it wouldn't surprise us.
Would be huge. The one guy that's closer and maybe more, certainly not going to call him a sure thing, but maybe more now in the mix for USC, Cyrus Moss, who again, we're about to talk about a few kids out of Bishop Gorman in this class potentially who could end up as Trojans. Yeah.
Cyrus Moss was a guy that USC had no shot on. We talked about that earlier, and they got into it immediately when Lincoln Riley took a visit to the Moss's home in Las Vegas. Had the in-home visit. The talk went really, really well. And we should add this too, that when Lincoln Riley came to Zion Branch's house for the in-home visit, or it was scheduled, I think that there was conversation between Branch and Lincoln Riley or maybe Grinch about Moss. And so Zion actually hit up Cyrus and said, hey, they want to come over for an in-home visit. You cool? And he's like, sure. So if they ultimately end up getting Cyrus Moss and Zion Branch, y'all can thank Zion. But anyway, it's Cyrus Moss is a guy that would be another huge pickup. It's an outside linebacker edge. We still don't really know how to categorize him, but it's going to come down to the visit went really, really well to USC. He left. I talked to him. I was talking to him face to face before he left for Miami. And he was loving what he saw at USC. And more importantly is his mom is ready to sign off on USC if that should be his choice. And I think if she had not been, this conversation wouldn't be happening about the possibility of getting Cyrus Moss. But I think USC actually feels really good about him.
And Oregon very involved at that point, and then Mario Cristobal going out to Miami. He gets kind of the final official visit
Yeah.
Moss goes from USC out to Miami. So a couple of Arizona State kind of in the mix for him and all that. I remember Cyrus Moss seeing him as a freshman at a camp, and he was, I think, all of 6'4" as a freshman, just,
Yeah.
all arms and legs lanky, and he's running with the safeties. And he, it just stood out as this like long, lanky guy who could run. And every year it feels like he got, 3 yards closer to the line of scrimmage as he developed. So it goes from kind of safety to that outside linebacker, and then hybrid, and then defensive end. And so he's continuing to put on weight, and you just love guys like that where the trajectory is just still going up. As talented as he is, as athletic as he is, feels like kind of getting better and better and better, growing into that frame, and could be a really good one.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Like I said, we all started off seeing him playing 7-on-7. He was in coverage at safety, and like he moved closer and closer to the line of scrimmage, and he got bigger. He got more comfortable playing football. He is well coached at Bishop Gorman, and so now you have a guy who's extremely versatile for a defense that Grinch has, that will be bringing to USC, because there will be times where those guys are, I know USC fans don't want to hear this, but there will be times where he will be dropping back in coverage. So
it is good to start wrapping heads around something. If they get to see the fullback, they also are going to see some outside line, some rush ends drop back a little bit too. And then someone that just picked up a USC offer out of the transfer portal is Jared Versa, a defensive lineman from Albany, who's looking to make that jump from FCS to Power 5. And one of the most kind of intriguing names in the portal has picked up a ton of momentum. As having played in the FCS, they played a spring season, they played a fall season. So he's played a bunch of football this year, and was just incredible. 9.5 sacks here in the fall, and just a guy that's kind of grown into his body. And you love the transfer. You can't stand the transfer portal for some reasons, but you love it for reasons like this, where that guy, he can prove himself there, immediately make the jump, play right away. It makes it easy for him to do that. And USC jumps in it for him. Probably not the last defensive lineman, like we mentioned, that USC is gonna jump in the mix for out of the portal here.
Yeah, there are a lot of guys, and we don't have a list of them, but December 15th, 16th, 17th, whatever, will not be the end of the recruiting process. So yes, I think there will be a lot of storylines that will develop between now and February, but this signing day alone, though, compared to where we thought this signing day was headed, 2-3 weeks ago, it's quite remarkable, to be honest.
It is sort of a fascinating thing. You all covering signing day is so much about signing day and who gets added there, and that's what leads every show and every headline. But you always had to kind of keep in mind that's not the entire class. You want to look at the whole class. USC's is interesting because you've got sort of the small handful of kids coming into the day. You've got who they're going to add that day, and then you've got sort of the rest of it that's this kind of question mark unknown. And so USC fans are kind of going to get, I don't know, multiple signing days, not just the 2, but I think it's going to feel like quite a few as transfer portal guys come in and that sort of thing, because there's really no set day on when they have to make a decision. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see Wednesday for what it is, and then the rest of the additions as we go along. But keep going along. So that is defensive line. Let's go back to linebacker. And again, there's that kind of outside linebacker defensive end mix, but a few guys in the mix here. The local guy, again, the Muscat guy from kind of the beginning, David Bailey, another guy at Mater Dei, and another chance for USC to kind of come in and say, yeah, we're going to own Mater Dei in this class. We've seen USC do really well at Mater Dei. We've seen them miss some guys at Mater Dei. This is a chance for them to, again, get in there and grab kind of anybody that they want. And so I think Bailey is one of those statement guys for that.
Yeah. We've been talking about him as that kind of that must-get guy for well over a year, right? And USC is got Rayleigh Brown committed. CJ Williams, I think, is going to end up at USC. And you're looking at Mater Dei. Gosh, you get David Bailey to join the other Damani Jackson and the other 2 guys. Wow. I mean, I'm not quite sure. There's been 4 players in one class that's come from any school that would be much better than, I mean, there were years ago when Paulie had, that was a big recruiting class for Pete Carroll, right? But, this would kind of be a statement. USC is finally got a program that is stable. There's a lot of excitement surrounding it, and the kids, they end up meeting Lincoln Riley, have a chance to visit USC, to get excited about this football program. They're excited about the coaches they have an opportunity to play for. So you start getting those guys in, and because of the stability, that will lead to, and not wondering whether Clay Helton's going to come back the next year, all that kind of stuff. People always were wondering, why does USC have fewer players sign on the first signing day than everyone else in the country? Well, I mean, you and I, Erik, we kind of knew the answer to that. But, I think you're going to start seeing early commits again at USC. And there's a few at modern day, maybe not in 2023, but there's certainly going to be some early guys, some guys in Southern California that will start committing early. I promise you it'll happen between now and the next signing day.
Sticking at linebacker, some guys early. There's a guy late. Garrison Madden is a guy who picked up a late offer from USC. And this is clearly a case of these Oklahoma coaches having an eye on him and knowing, hey, we can go back and take a look there. So they offer and they bring him out on a trip. And he's a guy who, again, goes from very little attention to him to maybe joining a USC class that gets talked about all day on signing day.
Yeah, I would say that the chances of getting Madden are pretty high. We spoke to him after his visit. You spoke to him before his visit. I spoke to him after the visit. And you could tell that the 2 days he was at USC not only left an impact on him, but his family. And I think you do need to make an impact on the family if you're trying to get a kid from Georgia to come out to Southern California. You just can't have the kid kind of like it. Oh, LA's cool. We hear that all the time, right? It was a great visit. Of course it was a great visit. You're in Los Angeles in the winter. When you're eating at really good restaurants. But this kid's really serious about football. He's really serious about the education part. And, I think that it's actually quite surprising to many that I talk to that his offers are what they are. That, a school like Florida State can't become a player for him. So I think that, this might be one of those guys that people around the country will be talking about saying, God, why was this guy not really recruited by that many schools? He really, and more about him, I think, than I do, Erik. You probably had a longer conversation with him than I did because he had to get on an airplane when I talked to him. But just talk about his speed and what he offers as an athlete, Erik.
Yeah, big time athlete. He's a track guy. He didn't play football his freshman or sophomore year. So he did play before he got to high school. Once he got there, he didn't play, ran track and did that. And then just kind of kept doing track. And you love football players that run track. I mean, there's so many coaches out there that are telling kids like, stop playing football in February, March. Like, don't do it in the spring. Run track. And he's a guy that did it. I love when his name first popped up, went over to his Twitter feed. The first post on there is a stuck video of him running track, and he's running the fourth leg. And I don't think I knew he was running the fourth leg. So as the first three are going around, I'm trying to pick him out. And all of a sudden, this giant grabs the baton on the fourth leg, a good distance back from the leader, and chases him all the way down. And you love that. Going back to CJ Williams, when you talked about him, one of the things that pops out to me is he started running the 400. And one of the videos I saw was him chasing someone down on the last lap of a relay in the 400. Just kind of the tenacity to be able to do that, to dig deep, to have that kind of effort. And again, the competitiveness, the drive, all of that, to do that. You can learn a lot about guys not playing football and
Sure.
how they will play football. And so again, if that's all you're getting from him, a phenomenal athlete who can run and looks like that physically as a high school senior, you're probably okay adding a guy like that to the roster.
Nobody ran the anchor like Austin Jackson, though.
True. That's true. Staying at linebacker, not going with kind of a raw, potential guy. A big time, productive guy at Nevada is Dan Henley, and he's a guy who got an offer out of the transfer portal. He's got a year. he was out at USC visiting from Crenshaw, so knows Los Angeles, not going to impress him with, what LA has to offer, but a chance to play at USC. And for a lot of guys who went to high school at Crenshaw, that could be a pretty tempting offer.
Yeah, the local guys from Los Angeles, they know what USC offers. And I think guys like Henley would probably even look at USC if they hadn't hired Lincoln Riley, and be looking at LA an opportunity to finish his career at USC, maybe add another degree, whatever it might be. But what's interesting is that I wasn't really that familiar with him, so I didn't know a lot about him. I knew where he went to school, and I knew he'd done great things in Nevada. But you start hearing from guys like CJ Pollard, and CJ replied to me, he says, "Yeah, that's my guy." So this is a guy, he is an LA guy, and I personally think you need guys like that on the USC football program. You got to have some of those guys that can educate the guys on what it's like to be LA, where maybe take them where you need to eat in Los Angeles and stuff like that. I know that sounds trivial, but I think you need to have some LA coaches, and I think you need to have some LA players. And I think, just based off what I've seen, I think you'd agree with this. I really think that being able to add him to the roster with that playing experience and his seniority, for a lack of a better word, I think it'd be a great pickup for USC.
It's another athlete. Like that is one of those things that's clear. What Lincoln Riley's trying to do to this roster is up the athleticism, the speed, the physicality, all of that. Just get guys who can run, who can fly, who are strong, who are put together. Like that is something I think that when he looks at the roster, he sees is missing. Guys who can run people down, because we've watched USC, that offensive players from other teams run away from USC defenders, and USC offensive players oftentimes are getting run down by defenders. There isn't that, elite speed across the board on either side of the ball for USC. There are some guys who can run, but just that team speed just has not been there over the last few years. So you're seeing guys who are that kind of athlete, I think, that Lincoln Riley's going after.
Man, just adding a couple of guys, I'm sure you're going to lead into Elias Ricks, but you start talking about some of the guys that will add speed to the outside and at the corner position, maybe at safety. It was almost shocking sometimes to watch some of these teams almost seemingly at will run wide on USC on like 3rd and 8. And it was like, God, really? You guys can't run down that running? I mean, not that they were playing against bad running backs. Well, USC was playing against running backs that weren't known as speedsters, and they were just getting out wide and having no problem. So yes, that's a key. Adding guys like Henley, and if they do add Elias Ricks, oh my goodness, that immediately you start adding some big time athletes to the defense.
Well, let's go to corner, because the corner might be the spot that gets kind of the most attention over the next little bit. And that's because Dwight Jackson, number 10 overall prospect, 5-star guy, was in USC's class and made a huge statement by committing early to USC. Yeah. He backs out. It's Alabama, USC now. That's a guy who, again, when you're talking about, what does the coverage look like of USC's class when it's all put together? Maybe he's the photo for the story about USC's class. Again, if things break positively for USC.
I mean, he was and would still be the face of the recruiting class if he ends up at USC. He was a guy that Dante wanted to commit early, and he wanted to have a few guys and commit early and get out and help USC recruit. But you need help from USC if you're going to do that as well. You have to have a good football team in order to make that all work. And so, yeah, Damani is one of those guys. He won the state championship in the 100 meters and edged out Roderick Pleasant, who was also very, very high on USC class of 2023 athlete from Sarah High School in Gardena. And so Damani, again, he watched the football team just kind of collapse like we all did. And he's just kind of like, I just want to say this, he loves USC. This is a guy who really, really wanted to go to USC, stay in Los Angeles, be close to his family. I think his family wanted him to go to USC. It was just a perfect scenario for them on how things were working out until the season happened. So they took a visit to Alabama, and it was kind of like, wow, what a contrast. So he decommitted a couple of days after his visit to Alabama, but he also had Michigan in there. I think that was kind of a dream school for him growing up. But I think with the way things have played out for USC and the staff that they have hired and the direction the program is, at least in these kids' minds, going, I think USC is going to end up with Imani.
And then the rest of the quarterbacks. So Fabian Ross is another defensive player at Bishop Gorman. He's been committed, for the whole time. Eli Ricks, you mentioned what he did at LSU as a true freshman, and now looking around at USC in the mix for him. And then Jalil Florence, a cornerback from San Diego, who decommitted from Oregon. Although it feels like the Dan Lanning hire at Oregon maybe rights the ship for some of those defensive guys, if he can say, look what we're doing at Georgia, and so maybe some of those guys jump back in. But your overall sense of kind of how this plays out at corner for USC.
Yeah, I'll just kind of play off of Jalil Florence, and you're talking about that with the hire of Dan Lanning, and this wasn't Jalil Florence that had told me this, but it was another elite prospect that Oregon was probably going to get. And he was just kind of like, he felt like Oregon had to make a hire almost like Lincoln Riley in order to keep that recruiting class together at Oregon. And I mean, quite frankly, I hadn't thought of it that way. But, the more you look at it, that probably was the case in order to at least keep some of their much higher profile guys. We've already seen them decommit, right, Erik? I mean, they decommitted like USC's decommitted, for different reasons.
Everybody bailed out. Yeah.
Right.
It felt like they couldn't wait to get their edit made so that they could get that out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think the way it's going to play out, I'm not sure, I know USC felt good about Jalil Florence after he left on his official visit this weekend. Fabian Ross is firmly committed. I always felt like I always went to Bishop Gorman, and, I would sit there, I would talk to Zion, Zacharias, Cyrus, and Jake Taylor, and all these guys. And then I get to Fabian. I'm like, all right, Fabian, for the fifth time, why are you solidly committed to USC? I mean, this kid literally would have gone to USC if I was coaching, and God, how can you not love that? Kid commits to the school. That's where I want to go. And there's just no wavering at all. But USC didn't take it for granted either. Dante kept on him like he wasn't committed. So, we've got to give Dante some credit for setting that one up. And who am I missing at cornerback now? I go on these rants about
for me, I think Eli Ricks, Elias Ricks would be the name that USC fans kind of what's going on with him, and does SC have a shot? Yeah,
that is a guy. Another guy. He wanted to go to USC. He was silent. Silent commits don't mean a whole lot, but he was one of those guys that was silently committed to USC for like forever. His mom is a USC alum, from Riverside. He spent a lot of time at USC. That's where he always wanted to go to school. But, now he went to LSU. 2 years later, he's going to be in the NFL next year. I mean, 2023 anyway. Does he want to win a championship, or does he want to come home, play at USC for a program that is rebuilding? You start adding guys like Elias. And I asked Elias, can I still call you Elias? And you start adding guys like that. And the program gets turned around a lot faster than you would think it, possible. But at the same time, God, USC is not going to win a championship, but national championships in 2022. I don't care who they bring in, and I'm not watching them do it. But but I really think USC is in a really good spot with Elias right now. You read some stuff that Ohio State doesn't have any room for him, and Alabama wants this guy instead of Earl Little and whoever. That might all be, but my goodness, Elias Ricks is somebody you take over anyone, in my opinion. And he's only going to be there for 1 year, so it's not like the other guys you would bring in your recruiting class are going to be that worried about it. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how Elias plays out. We may not have as much as we want to have on the chances for USC with him, but tomorrow we probably will.
And then we'll go back to safety, and safety's been one of those things where, again, we're going to go back to Bishop Gorman. Zion Branch is a guy that we've heard his name forever. It felt like, again, USC was way out in front, and then all of a sudden they weren't. And now Lincoln Riley comes in. I mean, it's the same ride for him as a lot of other guys. And so now when he makes his decision on Wednesday. He's got a final three: Ohio State, Oklahoma, and USC.
Zion Branch is one of those classic examples of when we say, watch what they do, not listen to what they say. Now, with Zion, you probably could have watched and listened and had it all kind of come together on where things were going. But yeah, here was a guy who has a family in Las Vegas. They're from Los Angeles. Zion, would have preferred going to USC all along. He and his family, I don't know how many times they've traveled out to Los Angeles as a family, because Zachariah Branch, his brother, elite 4-star wide receiver brother from Gorman, they must come out to USC just in the last 2 months 5 times, at 3 months anyway, maybe just before the season started. And he took his second official visit this last weekend. And I think what benefited USC greatly with the Lincoln Riley hire, other than his reputation and his resume, was that both Zion and Zachariah and the family had a relationship with Lincoln Riley and Grinch. They had been recruited by Oklahoma. I think the reason why Oklahoma wasn't higher on Zion's list was that I think just living in Oklahoma might have been something that was going to be a little bit hard to get past. So here we were left with Ohio State was looking like they were running away with it. We were hearing rumors every day. He's ready to commit. He's ready to commit. And his dad kept telling me, no, he's not. But, even today we were reading that he was almost ready to commit to Ohio State 2 weeks ago. I don't believe that was the case. But, it's not like you and I can know everything. But I strongly believe that was not the case. He was waiting to see who the head football coach was going to be, and also hoping that Dante was going to be back as well. So I think that USC, I made a prediction for Zion Branch and USC. And so I personally think that that's where he's going to end up signing on Wednesday.
Yeah. So that's kind of the offense defense look. Let's go. I want to kind of maybe put you on the spot a little bit. When Lincoln Riley on Friday is discussing this class, what USC was able to do during this early signing period, not necessarily what is he saying, but what do you see? How do you see this playing out? What are kind of the main points of this USC class when all is said and done?
Well, he probably isn't going to be able to say all he wants to say. He's a guy that's you need to load up in the trenches, and they clearly aren't going to do that on signing day. So I think he might even tell us that is the plan going forward. Again, just kind of remind us that, okay, I get it. We didn't bring in the offensive lineman that USC fans would have hoped for, but maybe he'll even announce they finally have an offensive line coach. But I like your theory on the offensive line coach. You think that the future offensive line coach at USC is probably going to be coaching in the playoffs or in a high profile bowl game. And
I just don't know. What strikes me about Lincoln Riley so far is that he is not caught off guard or has no plan. Like it's clear that he's got a coaching Rolodex and he can reach out and he can bring in some guys, some big time guys. And so at this point, I have to assume that he's not sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, I gotta figure out who I want as an offensive line coach." I assume he's got some targets or a target that he feels good about.
I have to agree with you. I hadn't even put thought into that level of the word, but obviously the coach is coaching somewhere still, and there are no games right for at least another couple of weeks. Well, maybe we're already at December 15th coming up here. So the bowl games will start, but like the bowl games we were talking about, the New Year's and later in December, you still have a couple more weeks until we may know who the offensive line coach is. But, I think that Lincoln, you end up getting a guy like Marvin Jones, for example. If you can start saying we got him, we got Zion Branch, we got Domani, Lincoln is going to be able to say, look, these are the guys, the type of players that we need to go get. We just didn't have enough time to maybe get as many as we wanted.
Yeah. And like we both said, this is sort of the start. I wrote a story this week that this is kind of the first big step that he can take to build that roster he wants to take this offseason. It's just kind of the beginning of this offseason for USC and what Lincoln Riley is going to be able to do with the 2022 class, and then also with transfer portal additions too. And then you hinted at it the 2023 class. I mean, again, I don't want to look too far. We still have 2022 signing day here, but going to be really fascinating to watch everything that Lincoln Riley does in terms of recruiting for USC. So that's our look at the early signing period for the 2022 class, and a little bit extra in there too, some transfer portal stuff and looking forward to. But for Scott Schrader, this is Erik McKinney. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. WeAreSC.